Something that no doubt will be annoying Rishi Sunak this morning is that once again the front pages are filled with his predecessor, the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and the trouble that he's causing over Partygate. Because I'll tell you now, that's going to roll on for a while. That is just more trouble down the road. But does it show that maybe Johnson and Truss are really spent forces in the Conservative Party? Remember, both of those big sort of officers in the Conservative Party urged their fellow backbenchers to rebel. Now, remember, there was a 3-line whip on this to get all Conservatives to vote for the deal. So there were about 22 Conservatives who defied the whip to vote no. But prior to this is something else which you don't see so talked about, which was very much in operation before the vote. Anyone who was going to vote no was being heavily whipped by sort of Rishi Sunak and the government to try and move them from no into abstain. And it should be pointed out that there was a very, very large number of abstains at this vote. Now, it's not unusual. It's not unusual for MPs to abstain. Maybe they're not there. Maybe they've got other business that they can't, leave and do at the time. Abstentions happen all the time, but not to this degree. There were over 48 abstentions to this vote. That's a lot of people suddenly abstaining from voting on this deal. That is a lot of abstentions. So a lot of people who were not happy with the Windsor Framework seem to have been, or at least convinced, by whatever the government was trying to sell. Maybe they were trying to sell this idea of, look, if you vote no, we have to rely on Labour votes to get this passed. And very much Rishi Sunak did have to rely on Labour votes to make sure that this did pass. It might not have been necessary, but the fact that they had to rely with Labour coming in and saying, look, if this is a sensible deal, we'll do it because it is in the national interest. That was a sort of a very good move by Starmer. And the question is now what happens? Is Brexit a spent force? Is the ERG no longer this powerhouse that it was? And are Liz and Boris also spent forces within the Conservative Party? This is a valid question, and one which I suspect we will find out soon. Because not only are we suspecting the Northern Ireland bill to potentially be dropped, there are also now questions about what do you do about Jacob Rees-Mogg's bill that he introduced of the EU retained law bill. Does Rishi Sunak quietly just put that to one side as well? Like I say, we'll find out in the coming days, but it is very interesting times indeed that the whole sort of Brexit Spartan Brigade seems to have very, very much had its day, which raises a lot more interesting questions of could we now see the government go and do more deals with the EU, including on things like closer alignment to get rid of more trade barriers? And if that's the case, why aren't we members of the Single Market Customs Union? And if that's the case, and that happens, then why aren't we full members of the EU? It is going exactly as we predicted it would back in 2016, that our path back to the EU was already pretty much predetermined and laid out for us. So let's see what Conservative Home had to make of all this Windsor Framework voting, because they're asking the very same question. Is Boris and Liz, is their time as being, or at least being considered as serious forces within the party, is that now over? So, before we do go having a look at what they've had to say about this sort of situation, please do remember to click that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the One Off Donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can well buy me coffee. And of course, there's the One Off Donation link called the Thank You button. And of course, the Pony Club down below as well. You can join too. So, as always, let's crack on with this. Over we go to Conservative Home. So, what they've got to say on this with the title of The Windsor Framework Tory Backbench Revolt and Quite a Few Officers, Not Many Privates. If you're going to help lead a rebellion against your party's whip in the Commons, you will want as many of your colleagues as possible to support you. So far, so obvious. And I think we have to talk about the number of abstentions. That was a lot of abstentions. And yes, you normally do get abstentions in votes. It's not uncommon. But it should be highlighted how many abstentions there were on that vote. So, the revolt against the government's statutory instrument on the Stormont break early today featured no fewer than 3 Conservative leaders: Ian Duncan Smith, Boris Johnson, and Liz Truss. We've yet to see the abstention figure. Well, we've seen it. It's 48. It's quite a lot, as we said. So these are never definite, in that they may just don't separate those who vote against a measure because they oppose it from those who don't vote against it because they are ill, abroad, or just otherwise indisposed. And like I say, there were a lot of people who voted, who abstained on this vote. There was a whipping operation on the previous day to get those people who would vote no to try and get them into the abstain column. That's what seems to have happened. And we knew about that because that's what everyone was saying, that there was this big whipping operation to get as many no's as they could into abstain. And it does look like that they managed to potentially see off quite a significant rebellion, because you can never really say about those 48 how many would have voted no. Because they do point out a good point. There are those who would have been ill, abroad, or just otherwise indisposed. It's natural to see, abstains on a list, but not 48. So, nevertheless, it would provide some wider context, which is therefore important, which, again, I hope I've at least given you for that. So, all the same, 22 rebels really isn't very many, at least by the standards of the Eurosceptic revolts of recent years. There's an element in this revolt of quite a few officers, but not many privates. The band of 22 appears larger to break down, and the former leaders aside, into the former Spartans, such as Mark Francois and Andrew Jenkins, the Johnson Loyalists, such as Jake Berry and James Dunridge, and serial rebels. I hope that Peter Bone and Christopher Cope will tolerate my describing them this way. I think that's certainly the way that they they would vote for. But again, I think it just goes to show you just how fractured the Conservative Party really is at the moment. They have a massive majority, but it certainly doesn't feel like it, to be honest. I mean, 22, they're talking about this being... They're very much trying to downplay this as, it was just a small rebellion, but still, 22 with the number of abstentions, I think it speaks to a very much a larger weakness on Rishi Sunak. That he couldn't move them into the yes column. He had to move them into the abstain. That speaks volumes. So, Priti Patel is another officer. So is Simon Clarke, and another former cabinet minister. The view from some in the lobby and in Parliament is that this afternoon will be that the European Research Group is a shadow of its former self, if not a busted flush. And I think that is something we now have to take into consideration. I really do think that is right. That is the right way to look at this. That the once all-powerful and mighty European Research Group, the scourge of so many prime ministers, and not just you know, from David Cameron to Theresa May, but going all the way back to the early 90s to people like John Major, and even those in between years, trying to push the party into this anti-European view. It was a tiny minority that became incredibly powerful and influential, especially during the coalition years, where the constant threat was, we are going to walk and you are going to have to deal with 13 UKIP MPs. That was the threat under David Cameron during the coalition years. That was where they built this once powerful group is but a shadow of its former self. And I think going forward, it's not just that group is now gone, but so too is Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. Their power that they once had is very much shattered. But this does not mean that the troubles for Rishi Sunak or any potential sort of future leaders of the Conservative Party is over. No, that the party is still very, very fractured, because how many groups are there now that are built on the same idea and the principles like the European Research Group? The other thing we've got to mention is we've heard that Steve Baker, apparently after he said on Sky News that he should support the deal, or at least encourage Boris Johnson to support the deal, or else he risks becoming a pound shop Nigel Farage. He was apparently booted from the ERG WhatsApp group. How, again, the mighty titans are being consumed by their own precious project. And I do not think this is the end of, shall we say, the consuming that Brexit will do to its once former champions. Because if Sunak and Jeremy Hunt really want to grow the British economy, then they have to do alignment deals with the EU, or just fully commit and just rejoin the single market customs union. That is the only way they will obtain growth. So let's finish this off. So I don't know about that, but Rishi Sunak didn't end up needing the Labour votes to get this regulation through. So this vote must be chalked up as a convincing win for him, and the sign that Johnson and Truss have less support among Tory MPs than one might have thought. Which, again, that's true. That's something this has signalled. But in no way is this a convincing win for Rishi Sunak. It is not a convincing win. The fact that he has had to whip so many Conservative MPs, the fact there was a 3-line whip there to begin with on this vote. So there was a 3-line whip. There was a whipping operation beforehand to get people from no into abstain, not into yes, because that seems to have been a step too far. But that 48 number, this still signals just how deeply fractured and divided the Conservative Party is. And it is becoming ever, ever clearer that Conservatives are starting to worry about Brexit. Was it the right idea? Did we do the right thing? Is this really damaging our economy? You may remember just a couple of days ago, there was the interview of Jacob Rees-Mogg, The Economist, who said, actually, no, Brexit has done massive damage to our economy. And then Jacob Rees-Mogg tries to deflect the idea and tries to move away from it as fast as possible. There are some interesting times ahead, and I wonder how long before we start to see things in the Conservative Party of maybe a pro-European group pop up. It's not beyond the realms of possibility, but it might happen. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, we'll see you all next time.